Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. Title of the show today is Why Syria Matters. And my guest this evening, again, is Dr. Rick Stagenborg, MD psychiatrist who's been a friend of mine for a long time and has been on the show a number of times in the past. And he's always so interesting and exciting and other things about him until I've got to have him back on again. Thanks again for coming on, Rick.
Thanks for having me, Don.
Yeah, and I'm not sure he's calmed down yet. He just finished over 4 hours on the road to be sure he could be here to talk to you folk. Thank you very much for going that long distance.
My pleasure. I get to visit my family when I'm up here too, so.
Yeah. How are you feeling right now?
Great.
You're not harried?
No.
I'd be pulling my hair out. Of course, that wouldn't bother you.
I've learned not to do that anymore.
Yeah, so rather than going through our usual procedure and add length interview about who you are personally, why don't you just tell the viewers, and me again, who you are just in general terms. And I'll ask you a few questions if you didn't give me enough information. And then we'll go into why Syria matters. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a former VA psychiatrist.
Yes.
Now I'm working full-time on anti-war work or pro-peace work.
Pro-peace work.
We call it pro-peace work.
Yes.
I have an educational nonprofit called Take Back America for the People. And I have this thing I call Soldiers for Peace International, which is not actually an organization. It's sort of an anarchical network. In other words, leaderless network.
It's the name of it again is
Soldiers for Peace International. Yeah, and it's I call it a virtual army. Our known members are on Facebook, but there are millions of us around the world because the definition of a soldier for peace is anyone who's working for justice in their communities, their nations, or the world at large. So there are millions of us, and what I'm trying to do is get people to key in to the idea that if we can figure out how to organize effectively a united international front against fascism and war, we can end war in our lifetime.
Ambitious.
Somebody's got to do it. I mean, I can't do it by myself, God.
Yeah. What about the anonymity of the management or leadership of the group? Is that for a reason?
There is no leadership. That's the point.
Groups usually have leaders, Rick. Why is there no leadership for your group?
This is not a group, it's a network.
A network.
Yes, anybody can be a leader. All they have to do is adhere to our basically nonviolent principles. We acknowledge that in countries that are under siege, under invasion, being bombed by NATO, they have the right to self-defense. So, but other than that, I mean, where we can resist peacefully, we do.
And how long have you been involved with this one?
I started it in 2001, after the, 1991. After the Persian Gulf War started, I got the idea that since virtually no one wants war, that all we really have to do is convince people that it's not inevitable and that we can stop it. And I thought, wow, there's an idea. Hey, I'll look up everybody I know and see who I can convince to spread this message. And as you can imagine, it wasn't very successful. We didn't even have the internet then.
Internet.
Right.
Listen, we're jumping way ahead of ourselves here. Let's back up because there are some viewers who don't know other than that you're a former VA psychiatrist. Shall I ask you some specific questions about who you are, or will you give me some more general ideas about who you are personally?
Well, what I realize is I am a soldier for peace, and that's about it. That defines me. It always has. I didn't know it until I sort of fleshed out the idea of what a soldier for peace is. So, but if you want to ask me specific questions, feel free.
Yeah. And when and where were you born?
Portland, 1958.
A native. I'm sorry. How'd you do that? Yeah, and 58.
Yes.
You're just a kid. Yeah.
I know. I've got many years ahead of me, hopefully.
Yeah. Anything significant about your cultural heritage or anything like that that would be of interest to the viewers?
Yeah, I come from a blended family. My father is a red meat Republican, and my mother was a bleeding heart liberal.
How'd that manage?
Who almost exsanguinated when Kennedy was murdered by the powers that be.
How'd those two people manage to get together with those kinds of differences?
They were young and hot, I guess.
Brothers and sisters?
Pardon? Yes. No, they aren't. But I have.
No, are you? I was waiting for it. He's going to get me.
Yes, I have 7 brothers and sisters.
7, and where are you in the lineup?
Next to youngest. I'm the youngest surviving son.
Yeah. Do you make any comment about your religious preference? Is that of any significance to the viewers?
I prefer not to have a religion. I have beliefs about God, believe in God. But I have a kind of a concept of God that I explained on the last show, and I don't want to go through the whole thing again.
What is your concept of God? What is she like?
Well, it's neither he nor she. I say it.
Okay.
I think that it is a collective consciousness, and we are a piece of that. Each of us is a piece of that consciousness that we have to find within ourselves. It's kind of a Buddhist, Hindu, Kabbalist type of a concept of God.
I like it.
Zoroastrian,
Yeah.
Gnostic.
That's enough. Do you have children?
Yes, I do. I have a daughter and a grandson, and I have 3 stepsons.
Do they like you?
As far as I know.
I see that look in your eye.
Sometimes yes and sometimes no, I suppose, like most parents.
Yeah. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations, other than the one you mentioned when we first started the show.
Well, I'm on the National Council of Alliance for Democracy.
Yeah.
I'm a representative of Physicians for a National Health Program. Those are probably the only groups I can say I speak for, other than Take Back America for the People.
Don't you speak for the Tea Party on occasion?
I speak to the Tea Party on occasion, and sometimes they listen. I mean, there are issues. The Tea Party is composed of people, and people have a lot of common beliefs. So you have to know how to talk to them in their language, and you have to frame it in their way of thinking. Otherwise, they won't understand what you're saying. I spoke to a local group of Americans for Prosperity down in Coos Bay.
Really?
About the need for a constitutional amendment, and I got a round of applause at the end. So, I mean, we all know something's wrong with the government. The question is, what do we do about it, and how can we do it together? Because you can't change government unless you do it together, because it's going to take, at a minimum, 1 constitutional amendment, and probably in the long run, a constitutional convention. That means we got to talk about what we want.
Should we talk about that a little bit before we go into the main questions associated with the title of tonight's show?
Sure.
We need a constitutional amendment to overcome the Citizens United decision of a couple of years ago.
Well, that was Citizens United. A lot of people think was a tragedy. I think it was the best thing that could happen to us, because it made the problem so obvious that now you can explain it to a teabagger in 2 minutes or less. Corporations and the rich can buy government, and Citizens United just laid that out. 80% of self-identified conservatives and liberals agree that that was a terrible decision. And
how can corporations buy government? That's a pretty strong statement.
well, I think, well, I suppose there's some people that don't know that corporations can give to 501c4s, and in some cases, and to 501c3s. 501c4s can legally funnel that money, but they have to reveal their donors, supposedly. Although they're usually just weird names like Citizens United, and you don't know who that is behind it. But they can also give their money to 501c3s, and the 501c3s can illegally give it, and that money, the source of that money, cannot be disclosed. And when I say give it, I don't mean directly to campaigns. Sure. It's not like 501c4s. But what they can do is they can do what Citizens United did. It's a 501c3 formed in the public interest.
In the public interest.
To educate people about the need for corporate control of the government. Basically, that's Take Back America for the People was formed to educate people about the costs of corporate control of the government. But anyway.
So what do they do with this money that it seems to be moving through these organizations, these 501c3, C4? Where does it go? How does it buy the government?
Well, influences voters, basically, because they pay for advertising. And it can be advertising directly in favor of a candidate, or attacking the positions of their opponent, or promoting their positions. It's brainwashing, propaganda. And it's
so the people buy it, and then they vote for?
They vote for the person who they think makes the most persuasive argument.
And if you got enough money, you can make a more persuasive argument than somebody who doesn't have much money.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's a lousy argument, if it has emotional appeal, then a certain amount of people will buy it because people tend to believe what they want to believe, not what's true.
Emotional appeal.
Emotional reasoning is what what they use. Frank Luntz goes around interviewing people about, hey, would you be in favor of this or that? And he phrases the question in different ways, finds what words appeal to people. That becomes the way they deliver the message, and that's the way they deliver the candidates. Now, it doesn't always work. See, I strongly believe a constitutional amendment has to contain a provision that absolutely bans corporate campaign expenditures in any form, which the move to amend amendment does not do.
Will you say that again? I want to be sure I heard you.
We need a constitutional amendment that will explicitly ban any corporate campaign expenditures. The move to amend amendment purports to do that, but it doesn't. It doesn't explicitly ban them. What it says is that money is not speech and that Congress shall regulate campaign expenditures. That's not good enough because Congress gets to define what that means, and so does the Supreme Court. So we need to explicitly ban corporate money. And the Bernie Sanders amendment, the new one that just came out a couple weeks ago, will do that. It limits all campaign contributions to individuals or associations of individuals.
Say who Bernie Sanders is for a moment for the viewers who are not up to speed with the reality of what's going on now.
Bernie Sanders is the only avowed socialist in the Senate.
Avowed socialist. Oh, so am I.
Well, I mean, you know, it depends on how you define the term. The way he defines it, I guess you could say I am too. The social democracy. It's not. See, one thing people got to get, and here's a message that hopefully your viewers will spread, is that socialism is an economic system. Democracy is a governmental system. They're not at all incompatible. That's the message we got to get out to people. You know, we need to be able to talk about, we can't just try to avoid the socialist label, we have to embrace it.
Yeah. You know, digressing for a moment, I asked you this simplistic question because I have a sign I wear around my neck that says, Hugo Chavez, we miss you. And a person who looked like they were born in the century said to me, who is Hugo Chavez? And he seemed like a pretty level-headed guy, but he had no idea, quite honestly. It made me sad.
It's very sad because most of the people who read about him who don't understand these concepts buy what they're told, which is that he was a dictator, a strong man, all this stuff. He was obviously none of those things. He was very popular. He was elected, reelected, and reelected again through some of the cleanest elections that are held these days, certainly cleaner than U.S. elections.
And Jimmy Carter certified him, yeah.
Right, right. And he was actually in a pretty difficult situation. It's been a gradual transition from crony capitalism, where a small group of people controlled almost everything, to closer to a socialist system, where people were guaranteed certain basic necessities: education, health care, a place to live, living wage, food. Now, it didn't work out completely because he's contending with these right-wing reactionary forces.
And the people who own the media.
Right, and people also say that he controls the media. That's nonsense. Yes, there's a state-run station, maybe two. I'm not sure the details, but they put all the big money into these private stations that do nothing but attack him. Yeah. And and he hasn't shut any down when they lie about him, which they do regularly. They have the equivalent of Fox News down there.
One more question before we go into the main topic of the show. There's been some talk in the far corners of America about Hugo Chavez having been assassinated by our government. And I think that there's probably a 90% probability that that's what happened.
I don't know. I came across an article recently saying that something like 7 leaders of Latin American countries have died of cancer relatively recently. I didn't dig into the evidence, so I don't know what to say.
I do know.
It's possible.
Well, I do know that there was over 30 attempts on Fidel Castro's life, and that was many, many years ago. And I think as time has gone by, science has become sharper and sharper, and there are ways now that they can do it where, given enough time going by after the person dies, the victim dies, then the cause of it disappears. So some of my friends accuse me of being paranoid, but look at history.
The CIA has admitted, I just read this today in the mainstream media, that the CIA admitted that they released swine flu, not swine, it's something that makes swine sick and kills them in Cuba and caused an epidemic. The idea was to,
destroy their food sources.
Destroy their food sources and disrupt the society, so they'd rebel. Same thing they're doing in Syria and Iran, in a sense, with their economic sanctions. They're trying to destroy the civil society. They did the same thing to Iraq. Thousands and thousands of people are dying, and people don't even know it. They never stop to think about it. In Iraq, during the era of the sanctions, 50,000 or 500, I think it was 500,000 children died as a result of those sanctions. They couldn't get medicine or food. So Madeleine Albright was asked, was that worth it? And she says, yes, we think so. Madeleine Albright.
Yes. We're drifting over into some of the
it's all related.
questions. Yeah.
It's all related.
Shall we go to the specific questions that we talked about before? Why does Syria matter? What's going on in Syria today? Why does that matter to us as Americans?
Well, before I start, I just want to say I wrote an essay about this on Soldiers for Peace International on the blog.
Yes.
Called "We Are All Syrians Now," and I really encourage people that are interested in this to study that, because it'll be there in more detail.
How do they get to your blog?
SoldiersForPeaceInternational.org.
Okay. Yes.
Or just Google Soldiers for Peace International, right? So anyway, Syria is sort of a key player in this whole thing. You know that the Project for a New American Century came out with a strategy paper called Strategy to Rebuild America's Defenses, published in September of 2000, 1 year before 9/11. And what it said, among other things, is that there are 7 key countries that need to be taken out in order to establish dominance in the Mideast, and which puts us in a position to dominate the world. And when I say us, of course, I mean the international corporate terrorists that control the U.S. government and military.
When you say taken out, what do you mean?
Destabilize the governments in one way or another. Sure. Basically take out the leaders. And so they went after Saddam in Iraq, and they've destroyed the society there. Using sectarian violence promoted by right-wing hit squads that we trained, Sunni on Shia, and it's horrible now, and you never hear about that. But it's as bad as ever. It's just that there's been so much ethnic cleansing that it's not as obvious now. But you still hear about the bombings and whatnot. But the government is very oppressive to the Sunni now. So anyway, Iraq was one of them. Afghanistan, interesting, wasn't mentioned. Apparently, that was already a go. They didn't need to point that out. But there was in Iran, of course, Sudan, Lebanon. I can never remember all of them off the top of my head. I keep thinking that, but
Northern Africa, Egypt, a different.
No, Libya was. I don't think Egypt was though, but Libya was, and if you look at these, number of those countries, the main targets of interest, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, none of them had Rothschild-controlled banks. None of them had central banks that were members of the Bank of International Settlements, which is Rothschild-controlled. So these were independent central banks, and they were threatening to challenge the petrodollar, every one of those countries. Has talked about either Iran, Iraq, and Libya all talked about converting to a gold-based system. Syria talked about using other currencies. Saddam Hussein did switch to the euro just before he was invaded. And Gaddafi was talking about switching to a gold-based dinar just before he was overthrown, months before he was overthrown.
Digressing again for a moment, the Rothschilds Say a few words about that. Some people who are not that sophisticated about the bottom line financial control
Sure.
of the world.
Well, the Rothschilds were the richest banking family in the world for centuries, and probably still are. And I haven't studied the history in detail, but they were behind the East India Company, which was,
Britain.
they were partners with British royalty in the East India Company, which had a lot to do with why we fought the revolution, because when they decided to put a tax on tea, they exempted themselves, this corporation.
The British Empire.
So you have that kind of corporate government synergy that we call now fascism.
It's not democracy.
It's not democracy, and it's fascism according to Mussolini's definition.
Yes.
That corporatism, or fascism is better called corporatism. So anyway, the Rothschilds were the backers of the British Empire, basically.
Yes.
And the British Empire controlled a large part of the world for a long, long time. When the United States became ascendant, particularly after the Civil War, they helped establish Rockefeller family in banking. And they were tightly associated with J.P. Morgan. Here's where I get lost in the details. But those are the two biggest power players in the United States historically, is the Rockefeller family and the Morgan family. And anyway, but if you look at it, the boards of these banks are controlled, or they control a lot of other corporations. Most of the most important international corporations are controlled by banking interests. And they sit on each other's boards on all these international corporations. And these are the people they talk about when they talk about the Illuminati. These are internationalists.
And these are persons now.
These are human beings, sort of. Internationalists. They think they look at the world like a chessboard or a monopoly board. And it's all about seizing control of resources. So this PNAC plan, the Project for a New American Century, their plan is a plan to dominate the planet and control all the resources, so they get to dictate the terms.
Dominate the planet, including China.
Yes, and this is why Syria is important, to answer your question.
Yeah.
Get back to the original question. If Syria falls, think about it. Russia's main allies are Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Libya was also a key ally. They're gone. If Syria's gone, then they're right on the border with Lebanon. And the Shia are a minority, the Shia. Hezbollah is a minority in government and in the population. So if they put enough pressure on them, they can eliminate that. And Iran will be totally isolated except for Russia and China. Russia has a lot of interest in keeping that from happening. But at that point, it's an open question whether Iran will fall, whether we'll go into World War III, or whether we could still stop it without stop our own government without violence.
So America then is doing something in the Middle East for what reason? They want the governments in the Middle East to be supportive of American interests and corporations? Is that the reason?
If you define American interests as the interests of international corporations that actually control our government, yeah. They want them to stand for American interests. And that's why they're targeting countries that aren't willing to go along with that. They've allied themselves with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and they're planning to install Muslim Brotherhood governments in Turkey, Syria, Egypt, everywhere but there, because they're monarchies.
But they're not democracies.
Of course not.
But isn't America spreading democracy around the world, including the Middle East?
They must have spread it too thin, because you can't find it around here anymore. No, of course not.
Yeah.
There's never been a true democracy here. The closest we came was in the post-war period, post-World War II, when the powers that be had screwed up so bad that the people got very angry and they weren't willing to go back to where they were before Second World War. So unions gained power. And this was, I was just reading about this in People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Excellent book, excellent.
Yeah, I mean, they pointed out that really they had no choice. We forced them. In order for the system to survive, they had to give up certain things. They let unions form, they let unions have some real power, but they had already infiltrated the unions, had been working with the unions, so the union leaders didn't really represent the workers for the most part. Wow. Of course there are exceptions, but when you look at it, the number of strikes went way down when unions got...
Are you a conspiracist?
No, Howard Zinn is, I'm just quoting him.
I know, I've been accused of being a conspiracist.
Well, let me say something about that. A conspiracy is any time two or more people get together to commit a crime. Anybody that doesn't believe in conspiracies is an idiot. That is the Justice Department's job, to reveal and prosecute conspiracies. They're not doing it. Ergo, they're part of the conspiracy.
Well, with that, we should tell our director in the control room to give us a break here, because I'm getting all steamed up hearing you say that kind of outstanding stuff. Mr. E, please, a little break here. Okay, we're back. Rick and I are getting each other steamed up again, but let's continue on. And for you viewers who just tuned into the show and missed the opening, I want to tell you what it's about. Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my friend Rick here, and like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. Now we're going to get more to the specific title of the show, Why Syria Matters, and we've been doing general stuff related to why Syria Matters before the break here. So let's resume where we left off, and I'm enjoying you as I usually do, more than before. I don't know how that's possible, but thank you again. We were talking about why does Syria matter, and what is really going on in Iran, and what is the end game in the Middle East, and what is the end game in Asia, and what can we do to stop it? Where do we go next?
I probably should talk a little bit more about what's going on in Syria, because it's being distorted systematically in the Western media. I do recommend that people seek out independent sources. My favorite is Global Research News. You get a lot of information out of that, pretty much everything you need. Another one is
Global Research News.
Right.
Research.
It's a blog, and they feature one article a day, and it's a.
Should I Google that or what?
Yep. Google Global Research News.
Okay, Global Research News, and what else?
RT's good.
RT, yeah, I got that one. RT, what? RT something.
Russia Today, RT News. And then NSNBC News, like MSNBC, only Nancy, NSNBC.
Yeah, why you got all this stuff, NSNBC?
Yeah, that's another great, very short blogs on really a huge variety of topics.
And you have some interesting people who are blogging, who have some depth to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the guy that started NSNBC contacted me when he found out about Soldiers for Peace International, and he's been a guest on my radio show a number of times.
Talk about a minute about your radio show. Where is it?
It's SFPI Radio. It started out on Blog Talk, and now it's on Orion, but we still have a Blog Talk radio page. So anybody that wants to find it, just Google SFPI Radio. That's for Soldiers for Peace International. And all of our archive shows are there. Some are Orion shows, and some of them are in the Blog Talk archives, actually. The other ones have links to the Orion archives. So we do international topics primarily. We've done a lot of non-international topics because they're important on a larger scheme of things. And I also have a show called Taking Back America, also on Blog Talk. They can find it the same way through the SFPI Radio network page.
Is Homeland Security approaching you yet for your leftist radical ideas?
Not too closely. If they're not paying attention, they're not doing their job. Yeah. Another one of the essays I wrote for Soldiers for Peace International was called "The Upside of the Loss of Privacy or the Death of Privacy." The idea is that if we're as open as we can be, and if all of us do it, they can possibly track all of us, and they can't stop all of us. We need to be as open as possible. That's why internet freedom is so important. And if we're as open as possible, then those of us who may present more of a danger to the corporatocracy will attract the attention of the NSA and everybody else that's spying on us, FBI, probably the CIA in some cases. If we attract their attention and they read our stuff and they realize, holy darn, I'm working for fascists.
Well, you clean that up pretty quick. Holy darn.
I am working for the wrong side. So what we're doing, I am intending to get them to pay attention so that we can turn them from the inside. And we already have people in the FBI and the military. And I assume probably in the CIA and NSA. I have personally made great efforts to do that. I call people in Pakistan on my telephone, including somebody who I've been told by a former CIA asset, I believe he's a former CIA asset, he didn't tell me that, it told me that this guy, it was a government-sponsored terrorist, a Pakistani government-sponsored terrorist who blew up the Peshawar Press Club. I don't know if that's true, but I'm hoping.
You better be careful. I don't want to lose you.
I've emailed, phoned the Chinese embassy repeatedly since 2009. I even think I got a response once, a diplomatic response.
And I'm your
Not
friend.
Direct.
They're going to come after me now.
Well,
but don't stop what you're doing. I love it.
Well, you know, they haven't done anything about it. When I went to Washington in 2010, I stayed at a small motel across from a secret NSA facility, which I photographed from the balcony, even though the entire motel was crawling with military, because that's who does the spying, low-level military. And I said, oh, this is so awesome. Low-level military, people who've signed away their lives to defend the country and the Constitution, are the ones doing the spying. I hope they're listening to this show, Don. I hope they listen to my phone conversations and read my blog and listen to my radio show.
Well, they're going to listen to my phone conversations now if they weren't before.
Like I said, if they are not paying attention to what I'm doing, they are not doing their job.
So you're a
and
soldier
you
for peace.
have nothing to worry about.
I have other things. Do you see the American empire diminishing or disappearing? Certainly not in my lifetime, perhaps in your lifetime, because you've got a few more years than I have left. In the next 30 years, is the American empire going to disappear or diminish?
I think so. The only alternative,
wow, man.
The only alternative to the American empire disappearing is the destruction of human civilization, because this whole plan that we've been talking about is primarily to establish dominance over oil and natural gas resources. If we continue to rely on those fuels, we are going to accelerate global climate change to the point where it is going to kill hundreds of millions minimum. You know, it's going to affect crops. Monsanto's doing their best to do that too. It's going to promote pandemics. It's going to cause floods. Fracking has been associated with earthquakes. nuclear power plants are being destroyed from earthquakes and floods. And
I think science is going to find alternative sources of energy so that we're not so totally dependent on fossil fuels.
We already have them. But the problem is that, as Bill McKibben says, the industry is so invested in it. Our entire military, their mission now is to secure those resources so we can continue to use them.
Dominance.
They are not going to quit using them as long as there's a profit in it. Here's a point I started to get to before.
Yes.
I said that the 4 biggest banks in the United States, well, all the biggest banks in the world are bought in heavily to these international corporations. It just so happens the 4 biggest banks in the United States are major stockholders in the 4 biggest oil companies in the United States. So banking, oil industry, and natural gas, they're tied together, and the military-industrial complex, all utterly dependent on each other. Who is going to stop that? The only people that can stop it is our Congress, and the only way that our Congress will stop it is if we get rid of the corporate tools. That's what Pledge to Amend is all about.
The corporate tools meaning the money that they're using to buy the Congress with...
No, I mean the tools in Congress.
Oh.
Who are bought with
I
corporate
missed that.
money.
Yeah, what do you think of the lobbyists lobbying in Washington, D.C.? Does that have any important influence on what's going on in Congress?
Well, yeah, of course it does, and one of the bigger problems is revolving doors. We can shut that revolving door. There's already a law in the book that says that a sitting member of Congress can't become a lobbyist for 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's why several Republican senators resigned just before it went into effect. They could make more money in the private sector if they're not allowed to take bribes. But you can actually put it in the Constitution that nobody in Congress or who worked for a member of Congress can be a lobbyist for 10 years before or after.
That's an important part of it, but what about the monies that still go into the lobbyists that are there?
Think about it. If they can't give them money directly, that's already illegal. If they can't give it to their campaigns and they can't offer them jobs, where's the inducement for them to betray us?
Okay.
That's my thinking. And besides, here's the other thing. The Pledge to Amend campaign is a campaign to make a campaign issue out of support for a constitutional amendment that will clean up campaign finance and abolish corporate personhood. And so if people are willing to make that pledge and then live up to it and support that amendment, if we get a Congress in there that can pass the amendment, they are not going to get bought off. We will have gotten rid of the corporate tools in Congress.
You are ambitious.
That I am confident we're going to do. The question is, how long will it take? Will global warming set the upper limit on how long we can screw around with it? Like I said, Bernie Sanders has a great amendment on right now. It doesn't have everything we want, but we should support it for now. Yeah. Because we need to get the word out there is a solution here. We need to do this Pledge to Amend in 2014. And we need to get behind an amendment that's been introduced in Congress. Now, Move to Amend got their version introduced in Congress in the House, where it will never even get out of committee because it's Republican controlled. In the Senate, it's probably still true it won't get out of committee, but if it does, of course, it won't pass. So they're going to reintroduce something else next session anyway. But if we get behind this one now and tell people to pledge their support if they want our vote for Congress in 2014, if we only take out 3 people that were expected to win and put supporters in there, people are going to wake up and realize they're next in 2016, and we will get the damn thing passed. If we can do this on a nationwide basis in 2014, like I tried to get people to do in 2012, I predict by 2016 we'll have that Congress in place.
Wow. Have we covered what's really going on in Iran?
We haven't even covered what's really going on in Syria yet.
I know. We've got 15 minutes left, for God's sake.
Let me whip through it.
Sure.
Okay, I mentioned all the media hype. It's a bunch of garbage. Anybody that's paying any attention knows that these are terrorist groups that are fighting the Assad government. Now, what a lot of people still haven't figured out is that the so-called atrocities, most of them that are being reported, maybe all of them, by Assad, are actually being committed by the terrorists. They're the ones planting the bombs. We know this. The
Who
US
are the
government
terrorists?
knows.
Who's sponsoring the terrorists?
Well, the U.S., Great Britain, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are the chief players.
So that they can topple the Syrian
And
government.
Turkey, yes, and Turkey.
And
Turkey wants to balkanize Syria so that they can have some control in the region. They want to be the big player. And also Erdogan, the president, he's a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. And there are Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. They want to be in power. But recently a Russian, a diplomat revealed some papers that the plan is to actually to break up Syria and further on down the line break up Turkey.
Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood, yeah.
Well, we've got to be a Christian nation in order to resist that kind of religious domination of the world.
In 2007, George Bush officially changed U.S. policy and allied himself with the Muslim Brotherhood types, basically with the Gulf monarchies, which we'd already been aligned with since after World War II when we put them in power, the Saud family. But there was a specific move, strategy to support those Islamists on the Sunni side against Iran and the secular states.
Why would they do this?
Syria, Iraq were secular. Libya was secular.
Yes.
So why would they do it?
Yeah.
Because that can motivate the terrorists to attack Iran, Syria, Lebanon. You know, there was a major bombing in Lebanon not too long ago, a couple months ago. And they tried to make it look like the Hezbollah did it, but it made no sense.
Destabilize the entire region.
They want to destabilize the entire region so that it'll break up and be easier to control. People will fight each other instead of them.
And they will arrange to have people fight each other. It's a classic. Let's you and him fight, and that way you won't have enough energy or strength or whatever it is to resist my domination.
Right. And here's an important point. This is happening under a Democratic administration. And yet I hear people, Democratic supporters, say, this is the most peaceful era since the end of World War II. Horse manure. All this stuff is going on right now. I mentioned Hezbollah and how they're trying to marginalize it. You know, there was a bombing in Macedonia that killed a bunch of Israeli tourists. Well, immediately, without any evidence, they claimed that this had to be Hezbollah. How'd they know that? Then they came up with some phony evidence. But the reason that they would do such a thing, either do a false flag attack or try to pin it on Hezbollah, whichever, take advantage of it. The reason they would do that is because the European Union has not labeled Hezbollah a terrorist group, as the U.S. has. It's very much in the U.S. and Israel's in the interest of the people who control the U.S. and Israel, for Hezbollah to be labeled terrorists, because then they can easily be, targeted in Lebanon, removed from any power there. If they have no ally in Syria, they have no power anyway, if Syria falls. And then again, Iran stands alone.
You mentioned...
You want to know what's going on in Iran?
Yeah.
We still have a few minutes.
Of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of, people tend to think a government is good or bad. That's crazy, The Iranian government is bad. No, they really are, pretty bad. They're repressive. They murder their own people when it suits their interests. And a lot of the experts I'm talking to think that they are deliberately provoking the situation. They're making it worse.
The Iranian government.
The Iranian government. Because it's the Revolutionary Guard that's in control, and the Revolutionary Guard is heavily invested in the black market. So as long as there are sanctions, then they're profiting. And the people are more behind them.
How much influence does Ahmadinejad have in the functioning of that government?
Probably not much, from what I've heard. He actually lost the 2009 election, and the Ayatollah, changed the results. So obviously he's their puppet.
So the Ayatollah is really running things in Iran?
by consensus. I don't think he is really the supreme ruler. I don't think anything he says goes. But I don't know the man. I don't know enough about him. They're politicians. And what they care about is maintaining power. He and the Revolutionary Guard have completely perverted the meaning of the original revolution, or the Green Revolution. It was supposed to evolve into democracy.
I'm going to digress for a moment.
Sure.
You mentioned Israel a few moments ago and then hurried on to something else. And we talked about Ahmadinejad in Iran. And Ahmadinejad has been accused of saying things about Israel that are totally outlandish. But I think he did say one thing that I agree with, and I'm going to be in trouble with some of my viewers, that Israel is illegitimate and illegal. And it's a fiction created so that America's influence can be exercised in the Middle East through Israel, effectively America's 51st state. Do the people of Palestine, historical Palestine, have anything to do with renaming their state Israel?
No.
And then somebody says to me, well, Israel has to have a homeland. And I say, Israel has homelands all over Europe. Mm-hmm. So people who are in this fiction now of Israel who want to have a homeland that their parents came from, you can go back there and have those governments behave responsibly and treat them like regular citizens of each one of those individual countries who got rid of them by establishing a homeland for them, stolen from the Palestinian people, so that they didn't have to deal with reparations and being responsible for what happened to the Jews under their regimes.
Yes and no. I mean, that's...
Where's the no?
Well, I don't think that was their only motivation.
Well, their major motivation.
To avoid paying reparations. I'm not sure how big of a motivation that was. The Zionist movement started way back when. I don't even know how long ago. I think it was the 1840s. It was more well known by the 1880s, but it was still a fringe movement. And real Jews back then understood that it was un-Judaic. It was against, and there are still many, many ultra-Orthodox Jews who are very vocally opposed to the existence of the state of Israel. Their interpretation of the Torah is that that God gave the Israelis Israel to keep as long as they could, be just and deserve it.
God again.
I take that as a personal insult.
I forgot about you being who you are.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
Sure.
No, but their interpretation of the Torah is that the Jews are the chosen people. They are chosen to lead by example, and when they stray, they will be punished like children. So, when the Israeli people set up a Quisling government under the Roman Empire and persecuted political dissidents like Christ, they essentially they gave up their freedom. They adjusted to being slaves instead of resisting. I think Christ was trying to tell people how to resist slavery.
I think so too.
And so and they killed him. So obviously not all the Jews back then agreed with it. The Sanhedrin were the 1%. And like our power players right now.
Your knowledge of history is impressive.
But you need to oppose that kind of persecution. You need to oppose that kind of injustice. I think Jesus was a soldier for peace. I think Muhammad was a soldier for peace. I think Krishna and Vishnu and all them guys, Buddha was a soldier for peace.
You go way back. How about in recent
Zoroaster. Martin Luther King, JFK were soldiers for peace. Gandhi was a soldier for peace.
Yeah.
He was a real soldier for peace. He was a medic in the, which war?
South Africa?
I think it was in the Boer Wars. He was a medic. I was also in the medical corps, so not to compare myself to Gandhi, but a lot of people think soldiers for peace are all veterans. No, we are veterans, active duty, and anybody who fits that definition of working for social justice. So I've lost the point that we started out on.
Well, we're having so much fun
I
along
know.
the way.
It's all connected.
Well, let's see if we can have some brief coverage. What's really going on in Iran, and are we being the West, going to bomb Iran or encourage Israel to do so?
I don't think we'll encourage Israel to do so. I mean, that's out of our control then. No, it would, the situation would be out of our control. Why would we encourage Israel to do it? If we were going to do it, we'd do it ourselves. And I don't think we're going to do it. But I don't know. I mean, people need to understand how important this is. These two things are tied together. There's something I left out too. I was going to explain how Syria is connected to Libya.
Sure.
In Libya, we knew years ahead of time that that they had tried. In 2005, an agent of MI6, the British equivalent of the CIA, spoke to an agent in MI5, which is the equivalent of the FBI, and tried to get enlist their help in a scheme to funnel money to terrorists in Egypt, I believe, who would invade or who would stage a coup in Libya. This was 2005. Mm-hmm. The story came out because of a pair of MI5 whistleblowers, including the person who was approached. That was known, and then they turned around and they did it anyway. That's what they did in 2011. They started funding these terrorist groups, put them in Benghazi, which is an oil-rich area in the eastern part of Libya.
Benghazi.
And once they had established themselves there, when the Libyan army came in, they said, "Oh my God, they're murdering their own people." These were terrorists that had taken over the area, and they're in this oil-rich area. So the U.S. goes to the UN and asks for a no-fly zone. Well, Russia and China were immediately suspicious, and they abstained. Unfortunately, under UN precedent, when two members of the Security Council abstain, that's considered a pass. So they got their no-fly zone, and then they used it to bomb all the cities where there was active resistance to the terrorists. And they just bombed their way to Tripoli, and then they bombed the hell out of Tripoli, and that's how they took over the country. And then they started murdering loyalists, they started murdering blacks, and next they'll be murdered Christopher Stevens, our ambassador, and next they'll be murdering each other to try to get power. And that's the plan. That's what they wanted all along. Oh, but they did get organized enough to create a Rothschild bank. And they're trying to do the same thing in Syria, but I hope they're not going to get away with it with our help. Hopefully they won't get away with it.
What's going to be the end result for Israel? Is it going to be a one-state solution, a two-state solution, a no-state solution, or what kind of a solution?
Well, if we have a solution, it's going to be a one-state solution. It's the only possibility. You cannot have a democracy and a Jewish theocracy in the same society. If everybody had equal rights, the Palestinians would outnumber the Jews, especially if they were allowed to return to their original homes, which is international law. Without that, I don't see how you're ever going to have a solution. At the very least, they need to withdraw almost completely or completely from the West Bank and give the water back to the Palestinians.
Do you think they'll do that?
No, not willingly. That's why we have to keep the pressure on. If America made its aid to Israel conditional on making real moves toward peace, then yes, I think we could persuade them. It would cause the average Israeli to think about the problem in a different way if they weren't getting $3 billion in aid from us every year with no strings attached.
There's enough people in present day, this fictional country called Israel, who like what the Zionists are doing.
Who what?
Who like what the Zionists are doing. Netanyahu and the gang of right-wingers who are running that country.
Well, yeah, almost everybody in Israel is a Zionist. However, in the United States, a lot of Jews are not Zionists. And like I said, there are some particularly religiously motivated people who are anti-Zionist in Israel. You know, Palestine before the
about 30 seconds.
Okay. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived in peace before the terrorists came in the 20s and 30s especially. 30s and 40s until the establishment of the State of Israel. They lived in peace. They can do it again, but the people of Israel have to choose.
Well, it's time to stop visiting and get ready to say good night. So keep your pens and pencils handy in case you want to jot down something we might show you in the closing credits. Give us feedback, both positive and negative, about anything about the show. A few public service announcements. To get my show local broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on present day activities. And to watch my Dr. Don shows on the web, go to my website again and click on favorite links. There's a bunch of shows up there. Next we should have the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Without the ACLU, I think our civil liberties would be in worse shape than they are nowadays. Thank you so much. Please join the ACLU. What else do we have in there? To get my shows broadcast by other stations where you are around the country, ask your local public access station to go to www.pegmedia.org and follow instructions there on how to do that. Man, the most important one, how to end corporate personhood. Go to www.movetoamend.org. That's a start. We got to end corporate personhood, take our country back. And what else do we have to say? Rest in peace, poor people's president, Hugo Chavez. I'm still sad about this wonderful, beautiful human being who passed away. And I don't think he passed away. Again, I'll repeat it. I think he was taken out. Thanks for watching. And remember, KFC. Oh, not that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and charitable. To you, and you, and you, and you. Thanks again for watching. Good night.